You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare. Recent revelations that 3 people were enslaved in London for over 30 years have shocked the nation. Slavery was abolished 200 years ago, but modern-day slavery, whether it's domestic servitude, forced labour or forced sex work, is still alive today. And the story of these 3 people who lived as slaves in London was splashed across every newspaper in the UK. But is coverage like this in the media enough to stir public conscience, enough to act and to look out for signs that people are wearing invisible handcuffs and living as modern-day slaves in Britain? A documentary on television influenced the victims to ask for help, evidence that the media can help those who need it. But what about the theatre? I chose to host this discussion after going to see a play called Asena, which is a solo drama telling the harrowing story of a sex-trafficked Albanian woman in Britain. Joining me is Genevieve Cleghorn, actress in the title play Asena, which was written and directed by Stephen Lovelace, who is also here. David Benedict, Chief London Theatre Critic for Variety magazine, is here, along with author, broadcaster and human rights journalist Badisha. So my question today really is, can theatre change and influence society and politics, or do people now turn to the internet and social media, making the stage redundant? I'm going to first of all come to you, Stephen, to tell us about the play Asena and why you decided to write it.
The idea came when we were just actually thinking about doing a one-woman play, but we felt an issue started to come closer and closer, and then we discovered through Genevieve more about trafficking, so we began to explore it. And of course there was lots of research, and we had to go through quite a lot of research. Then we went through various charities such as Salvation Army, and they did allow us access to an actual survivor who was willing to actually talk face to face. And though I wasn't present at it, Genevieve spoke with her in a cafe, and in fact her own story was too fantastic to actually include in the play in the end. She was trafficked in from Africa. So the actual work of it, while other charities such as CARE, they gave us testimonials, we were talked to justice workers, and bit by bit we started to put together all the different stories that people have suffered. Nowhere in the world seemed free of it. Everywhere was ripe with it, if not actually practicing, then as transit. And in the end we created Asena from all of those put together.
Genevieve, maybe you pick up now. What is it to play Asena?
I think it's always going to be probably one of the most challenging roles I will ever play. Obviously, you know, me being a British woman and having to get into this, you know, Albanian character, but more so just to relive 50 minutes. And then after I've, you know, done that 50 minutes on stage, I'm then left with a very sobering thought that there are hundreds of girls, you know, thousands, millions, whatever the number is, who are literally reliving that scenario over and over again, hour after hour after hour, without break. So, you know, to know that people who come and see the play are so affected by it, which they are, but as I said, we can all walk away from it. I can walk away from the stage. People go back and they're left with the memories. But the fact of the matter is that those girls are just living it.
What do you think then, David, the role that the arts have in issues like modern-day slavery and trafficking, in particular, you know, presenting these issues on the stage?
I think political theatre is generally believed to be a minority interest. It's believed to be terribly unfashionable, but actually it's there in one form or another in all sorts of places. And political theatre used to be about certainty. There were plays about socialism from the 1950s onwards, with Look Back in Anger breaking through the drinks trolley and introducing the kitchen sink. You get plays about certainties, about very clear political things. And what has happened in politics is that things have got fractured. So you now do get a lot of political theatre, but it doesn't look like old-fashioned political theatre. You get feminist theatre, you get lesbian and gay theatre, you get identity politics, and an issue like trafficking trafficking is absolutely ripe for examination in a show like this, because you can do something very, very intimate. People argue that political theatre is naive and that you can't change people's opinions. I would argue that you absolutely can, and that the experience of watching a solo performer like Genevieve being expressive and making you understand something in a very direct way is very, very powerful, and much more powerful than looking at a page of news on the internet and then clicking on something else.
It's another way of keeping issues in the public domain once they slip off the news agenda. But Isha, do you think that there is enough sort of onus on the theatre and what it can do to influence society? Or do you think people really are just going to the internet and YouTube?
I don't think people are going to the internet and YouTube. I agree absolutely that political theatre, particularly if you present it that way, makes people roll their eyes. I mean, there's nothing more disheartening than issues-based drama. If I said, you're all invited to a 2-hour play about global poverty and health, no one will want to go to it. But everything in life is political. I mean, what is Chimerica or Frost Nixon or Enron or Black Watch, other fantastic theatre productions, if not political? And there is something to do with human rights and theatre that I think go together incredibly well. And that's because in daily life, I don't think people don't care about trafficking. I think people are busy. I think sometimes the stories are so traumatic that there's a knee-jerk response of wanting to just switch off and go to the next page of the newspaper. Trafficking is globally endemic. The overwhelming majority are women and girls, but boys and men are also trafficked. The domestic labour exploitation often swims across into sexual exploitation, and you can be trafficked within countries. I did a really harrowing panel discussion at the South Bank where a woman described how her 12-year-old daughter had been trafficked even within their own town and their own city, and the police didn't believe her or the daughter. They thought it was, you know, her choice, which is impossible. You can't. She was 12. This girl was 12. And at the end of it, we had an actress reading out a testimony. You could have heard a pin drop in the room. I mean, people were crying. People didn't just come up and go, oh my God, you know, my heart's bleeding for you. They then said, what can I do? Where can I go to learn more about the real women behind this performance?
Do you think, though, David, there is enough theatre in Britain that is like this, that's taking place and that is picked up by the mainstream media?
I think that's an astute question. The problem is not, does this theatre exist? Yes, it does. Whether it's picked up by the mainstream media is a completely different issue, and the answer to that, of course, is no, it isn't being picked up. There's less and less space and less coverage of the arts in general, anything that is other than very, very mainstream and very, very large audience. You know, trying to get theatre coverage for anything other than, say, an Andrew Lloyd Webber musical is really, really difficult, or something with Judi Dench attached. Now, if you're going to be doing small-scale political theatre in small venues where you have a direct impact on your audience, that is not going to be deemed sexy enough in order to get the coverage. So I think that the theatre is happening. I don't think it's fully supported in the way that it could be. And theatre production companies and houses that want to promote this kind of work need to get more savvy about how to present that work and how to build audiences and attract audiences so that more people become aware that it's happening and can then access it.
Stephen, would you like to pick up on that point?
Well, everyone keeps saying political theatre, and you've all said things I agree with, but I don't like it as a word because it again puts a tag on something. It puts it in a box. We're talking about lives that people are living. And having to live, and the fact, I don't know the exact distance, but I think in a major city like London, you're never more than 1 mile from someone that's been trafficked. And we're not just stopping at trafficking, there's all the other things which we could call them political, but they're still our responsibility, the abuse of children, the abuse of animals, every way you look at it, it's not political. It's about our lives, how we choose to live and build our own society. If you still believe in a society and a community.
But at some level, I think you do have to... I mean, I can completely understand. I used to run a lesbian gay theatre company, and as far as I was concerned, we were producing work for audiences. I was happy if there was a high preponderance of lesbians and gays in the audience, but I wasn't doing it solely for that particular group of people. And you are clearly not making work that is specifically designed to play to a particular audience. You want the issue of trafficking to be experienced widely. And yes, therefore, the labelling of it as political theatre isn't helpful, because you're making theatre, you're not making political theatre. But as a mode of discussion and as a way of promoting it, one has to accept labels at some level, I think.
Adisha.
Something very interesting is happening, which is at the same time that we're seeing theatre critics and arts critics across the board basically being sacked, and newspapers reducing their pages radically to the point where you really notice it on a Sunday if you buy the papers. I think that we're actually living in a much more humanitarian-minded era. So the arts coverage might be going down, but our awareness of humanitarian issues, the fact that the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, I was looking at the Twitter feed called Counting Dead Women, which was counting down the women unfortunately killed by male violence this year, which is 2 a week, and it named the victim and it named the perpetrator. We're all doing this now. We do live in an age of protest, and we do live in that global age, which enables us to understand something like trafficking. Something I wanted to bring up was a fantastic play by Cora Bissett called Roadkill, which is also about trafficking. And you go, it's harrowing but wonderful. You travel on the bus with this young woman who thinks that she's coming to England to go and help out a woman, and the woman is in on it and she is trafficked, and you're right there in the room with her. Well, that play is now touring America, and along with it they've produced a fantastic anthology of writing about trafficking that we were asked to interpret it in any way we wanted. So even though perhaps the audience for that first showing was relatively small, they went away and they were so struck that they told people. You know, we expect every artistic thing to be this phenomenon the moment it comes out. It doesn't work like that. When something really affects you, it takes a while for you to absorb it, and then you tell people and you pass it on. And that's part of why we're even doing this discussion, because we care and we know about it, and we started off not knowing about it.
Genevieve, I mean, does that sort of encapsulate how you feel when you begin with Asenna, that it was sort of in its infancy and it grows and grows and grows, and despite audience numbers being small, your character becomes bigger, and you hope then that this character's growth can tell more people in as much as the audience growing?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, you know, what we found is that our audiences, though small, as you were saying, David, they haven't actually been a specific group of people. They've been, you know, different ages, different backgrounds, male, female, and the response has always been unanimous. And as we've already discussed, because they're not just reading an article, they're understanding it not just on an intellectual level, but on an emotive level. And we've always said that our work, we want to reach hearts and minds, and that really stirs people to go and do something. But, you know, you were also mentioning about the label political theatre, you know, being unfashionable, and, you know, perhaps there is a certain amount of cynicism with our society, or as you were saying, people are busy, you know, they don't want to be traumatised by certain things. And certainly what we're asking ourselves is, well, how do we bridge that gap? How do we bridge the gap between the responses that we know we get from people when they come to see it, but still the question remains how to get more people to see it, because we believe it is so important. And, you know, I've just been observing the way people around me, when I see them look through newspapers, or whether it's on Facebook or Twitter, there's just so much information, but the page is just turned over, then there's a new story. But to really get people to stop and to think, and as someone said to me yesterday, you know, when they come into the theatre, they are forced to take that 50 minutes or however long it is to really, really let that issue really, you know, sink deep down. And, you know, it's just such a terrible shame, a tragedy if, you know, if our country doesn't embrace more this type of theatre that, as you were saying, Stephen, is in and of our times. It's like the world is changing and things are happening right under people's noses and they don't even notice it. And then all of a sudden, you know, something is uncovered, like the terrible story in Lambeth, and people think, well, how on earth has that happened? But, you know, that is a result of lots of little things. It happens, you know, it's process and it's time. And we need to open our eyes and to take notice. We have a responsibility to do that to one another.
But going through, what you said, David, about you can get coverage for an Andrew Lloyd Webber play, the West End shows, visitors flocking there every year. The theatre is about escapism. So there is an argument that people don't necessarily want to see something so harrowing when they go to the theatre.
I've not seen Stephen and Genevieve's play yet, but I'm willing to imagine that actually it's probably not unrelieved difficulty and pain to watch it, and that skilled theatre, whether it's in a small venue with this kind of work, or indeed at the other end of the spectrum with a large show at the National, is about finding a way of telling a story and engaging an audience, no matter what the subject matter. I mean, quite often, when I've been in an editorial chair and you get a lot of offers about, what they want you to come and review and what they want you to cover, and people go, oh, you'll be really interested in this because it's about fill in the blank. And my response is always, I don't actually care what something's about. I want to know how well you're doing it and what your approach is. And that people may go to the theatre for escapism, and if you're going to pay £70 to go to the West End, you certainly want escapism. But I also guess that Stephen and Genevieve's play is probably not £70 to go and see. And therefore, the risk factor of I'm going to spend an evening going to find out about something I didn't necessarily know enough about. And then having that experience, theatre doesn't have to be escapism. And also, you can make, in the widest possible sense, something entertaining, even though it's seemingly difficult.
But Isha, you mentioned how empowering it is to see on Twitter the people, the sort of protest movement globally on issues like domestic violence against women. That audience isn't sort of being reciprocated in the physical theatre.
I don't think that we need to chase huge audiences. And in fact, it's a very capitalistic idea that you bring something out and it's this thing called a hit. And you've got a hit when loads of people are coming and there's champagne afterwards, and then your ticket prices rise, and then you try and leverage your power and you try and make another hit. In human history, as we've seen for 5,000 years, the people who made fundamental changes to the safety and well-being of society were very much in the minority. They were small groups of brave, humanitarian-minded, decent people who were willing to speak out, even though if you speak out about things like sexual abuse, which is what we're talking about, and all the other stuff, you stand up and everyone just shoots you full of bullets. But they did it. So I don't think it matters very much if you bring out an incredible piece of work and at the beginning you are playing to small houses. I think that social change, and indeed artistic change, frankly, takes a long time, and it goes very deep, and then it comes back, it sort of goes deep, and then it surfaces 20 years later, and everyone goes, my God, this is so mainstream, what an amazing idea. And of course, usually the pioneers get forgotten. That is true. But I think it's okay if audiences are small. This is sometimes what it takes. It takes one person or two people to change the world, providing that they're speaking out. And so this is why all forms of theatre are incredibly vital.
There's something about the live experience that really is unique, and I don't say that as someone that worked in and now comments on theatre. I do think that there's something about the human scale of theatre. And interestingly, from the 1980s onwards, when Walkmans arrived and you could get what sounded then like amazing sound, and then digital arrived, and now you really can get staggering sound, and you can download any piece of music that you want, pretty much, within seconds of thinking about it. But given all of that, people are still going to see live bands. You still want to go and hear a singer's voice or an instrumentalist play her or his guitar. And actually that live experience, I think, becomes more and more precious in a world where we are online and connecting with something that has kind of false engagement. I'm on Facebook as much as anybody else. I'm on Twitter as much as anybody else. And I know perfectly well that I think that I'm speaking to people, but of course I'm not. And that's so bogus. And then you go and see a live performance, and actually it gives you something because you are facing that person and they are speaking in good theatre as if to you alone. It's an amazing experience, particularly watching a solo performance. You get the connection in a way that you simply don't, no matter how great the movie, no matter how great your sound system at home is when you're listening to a CD or you're listening to the download. That's not the same as being in a theatre. And actually, as Badisha says, it's not about the size of the audience, particularly at the beginning. As you know, a show may grow and become more successful, but even if it doesn't, you can still have an incredibly powerful response to somebody speaking to you about something.
So that response can be measured in what it does to someone's social conscience inside, as opposed to the response on 1,000 Twitter followers.
Yes. I mean, I don't know at what point we decided that the value of something was to do with the number of audience members it attracted, because that seems to me to be an entirely false connection.
And also, I'm very cynical about the whole Twitter followers thing. I think it's very easy to be a clicktivist, which is that you go, yes, trafficking is clearly bad. I will write one tweet about it. I won't give any money. I won't get in touch with the Helen Bamber Foundation or the Poppy Project. I'll just write my one tweet, and that assuages my conscience. And then I'll watch Game of Thrones or do something, not that there's anything wrong with that, or I'll do something else. So, as David has said, and I completely agree, I believe in kind of people marching on the street and being in a public space and talking as we are around a table, much more than I believe in people calling themselves social activists who are basically sitting at home looking at a screen, ticking a box.
Actually, a friend from Russia emailed me and she said, social media really is selfish media. It's about seeing your name. It's about giving your opinion, your joke of that day.
And being seen to have publicly signed the petition.
And yes, this is who I am. Look, I can keep putting all these labels on myself and you'll think I'm a nicer person or whatever it might be. I know David was talking about the angry young men and women of the 50s. Look Back in Anger, L-shaped room in novels and so forth. And films, we have the social realism, which continued into the 70s with feminist theatre and so on. But in all that time, whatever your choice of art was, be it film, television or theatre, you always had a balance. And now the balance is 99 point something percent escapism. It's about who's sponsoring the theatre. We have a tagline which says the truth is in the work, the courage is in the audience. And I'd like to add to that, the bravery is in the theatre.
We've always operated with a centre on the basis that, you know, if there's just one person there in the audience, we absolutely believe in the, you know, the so-called power of one and the individual. But at the same time, I don't think it's fair or right to sort of, we're just not going to be able to carry on doing it on that basis. And that just goes hand in hand with what you were saying,
well, that's right.
Stephen,
And sponsorship demands that we change things. The amount of times people have said, well, if you've got redemption at the end, people will come. They want Pretty Woman. They want a happy ending.
It's the tail wagging the dog. Yeah. And it is because there is such an imbalance. You know, as Stephen said, it hasn't always been this way, not to this extreme. And I really do think that that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. I mean, people... I remember you went to see films that you enjoyed, you went to see plays that made you laugh, and we brought up as from pantomime as kids, but also, and it just seemed the way everyone did it, my parents, how it was at school, other friends, we also went to see things that were what people might term serious, but were about things, and I discovered things that I would never have known it existed unless I'd gone there. And again, as they were saying about theatre, it's instant. You're there, you're part of it, you can't escape from it, you can't switch the channel off, you can't keep flicking. You can't walk out, of course, or act very uncomfortable. You know, there's that, and you can see the sweat on the actor's face. And in how we were playing it, I mean, Genevieve was just feet away from people, telling them about it. So, power there, and everyone that's come out has said it was powerful.
Going back to what you said, David, about the cuts and the coverage in mainstream media, how severe is this and how damaging is this going to have in, say, 10 years, 20 years' time in the way theatre is covered in the UK?
It is undeniable. I think if people don't know about political theatre, they also don't know about the state of journalism. I mean, you know, the Guardian is losing millions and millions and millions of pounds every year, as are several other newspapers. I don't wish to particularly single that out, but you know, coverage is massively decreasing. I spent 7 years on the Independent, and in the 90s we had the best arts coverage of any newspaper. It changed the way arts coverage was done. It was huge. And now the Independent on Sunday has sacked all its arts critics. They have no live reviews on Sunday. They repeat any reviews that they ran during the week. There is absolutely no serious approach on that paper. They do feature coverage for the arts, but you know, it's disappearing. In America, theatre critics are, I mean, dying breed is no exaggeration. I mean, newspapers are disappearing. The New York Times is in perilous state because of its finances, because people are no longer reading newspapers. Basically, the simple, if exaggerated, but basically truthful line on this is that people under 30 don't read newspapers because they go to all sorts of other media in order to get news if they're interested. And people over 30 read them online. So therefore, there is no income. We're in a recession, so advertising is down. So every newspaper proprietor is chasing anything that will give them some kind of money.
Vidisha.
We're not losing the number of voices that are out there. So what's happening is you or I or whoever do a blog. We have our own site, or we're part of multiple other sites. And that one site, say I have a blog, put it like that, it's like a newspaper produced by my brain. So I go and see a Senna, and I'm so enthused by it, I'm so impassioned, I write about it. Someone picks it up, they write about it, they go and see it. So you have this incredible lateral network spreading out. You have the digital version of word of mouth. And I'm actually finding that incredibly exciting. It's the way books now become famous. People go online and they talk about it. What's not happening is that it happens under the umbrella of a newspaper that you know and you recognise and that has a pedigree. That is splintering. So we're seeing a dissolving of the old establishment, who are now having to scramble to gather together their identity. But you're having an incredible proliferation of voices, which is why I could even say that a Senna and the issues associated with it have more chance of catching on like wildfire, because I tell people who are like-minded, they tell people who are perhaps less like-minded. And so it's like a forest fire, it spreads across.
And that once upon a time, word of mouth was simply Vidisha ringing me saying, oh, have you heard about this? Or you go drinking in a pub afterwards. Now, you can actually influence all sorts of people by simply presenting your feelings about it online.
Exactly, and I could get in touch with the Asena team, say, give me some stills, give me a little bit of the script, let me interview Genevieve and talk about it. So that's an enormous responsibility for me as a journalist working entirely for free. But in terms of the play itself and in terms of the wider issues that we're all talking about, it actually means it has much more of a chance of gaining traction.
Would you be more convinced in the future then by social media, Stephen?
Not yet, because I do know that we went out to, nearly 250,000 people.
It's hard. It's hard.
But including the actual charities that have supported us in the sense of giving us their banners, not one has yet come to see it. And I think also the forgotten power of the theatre is, unlike most probably any other media, obviously than instant media, a good team of actors, providing they've got a bit of space, they can turn an issue around in 2 weeks. As soon as it comes into the news, they can produce something much faster than the cinema or television.
What we have to do now is take all of our passion and our interest and really go for those structures and those authorities, people like the police, Interpol, and get something done about this in terms of convictions, in terms of following traffickers. The absolute best book for anyone who's interested is Lydia Cacho's book, Slavery, Inc. She's talking about Latin America, but what she says is applicable worldwide. And she shows how the trafficking of women and also men follows the trafficking of guns and drugs. So there's an economic sort of circle here. And if you see a Senna, if you see Roadkill, and if you read Slavery, Inc., I defy anyone to simply just sit back in their chair and not do anything.
That was Vidisha, author, broadcaster, and human rights journalist. And I'd like to thank all my guests. David Benedict, Chief London Theatre Critic for Variety magazine, actress Genevieve Cleghorn, and writer and director of A Senna, Stephen Lovelace. Written. Joining me is Genevieve Cleghorn, actress in the title play A Senna, which was written and directed by Stephen Lovelace, who is also here. David Benedict, Chief London Theatre Critic for Variety magazine, is here, along with author, broadcaster and human rights journalist Vidisha. So my question today really is, can theatre change and influence society and politics, or do people now turn to the internet and social media, making the stage redundant? I'm going to first of all come to you, Stephen, to tell us about the play A Senna and why you decided to write it.
The idea came when we were just actually thinking about doing a one-woman play, but we felt an issue started to come closer and closer, and then we discovered through Genevieve more about trafficking, so we began to explore it. And of course there was lots of research, and we had to go through quite a lot of research. Then we went through various charities such as Salvation Army, and they did allow us access to an actual survivor who was willing to actually talk face to face. And
you're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare. Recent revelations that 3 people were enslaved in London for over 30 years have shocked the nation. Slavery was abolished 200 years ago, but modern-day slavery, whether it's domestic servitude, forced labour or forced sex work, is still alive today. And the story of these 3 people who lived as slaves in London was splashed across every newspaper in the UK. But is coverage like this in the media enough to stir public conscience, enough to act and to look out for signs that people are wearing invisible handcuffs and living as modern-day slaves in Britain? A documentary on television influenced the victims to ask for help, evidence that the media can help those who need it. But what about the theatre? I chose to host this discussion after going to see a play called Asena, which is a solo drama telling the harrowing story of a sex-trafficked Albanian woman in Britain.
Though I wasn't present at it, Genevieve spoke with her in a cafe. And in fact, her own story was too fantastic to actually include in the play in the end. She was trafficked in from Africa. So the actual work of it, well, other charities such as CARE, they gave us testimonials. We were talked to justice workers, and bit by bit we started to put together all the different stories that people have suffered. Nowhere in the world seemed free of it. Everywhere was ripe with it, if not actually practicing then as transit. And in the end we created a Asena from all of those put together.
Genevieve, maybe you pick up now. What is it to play Asena?
I think it's always going to be probably one of the most challenging roles I will ever play. Obviously, you know, me being a British woman and having to get into this, you know, Albanian character, but more so just to relive 50 minutes. And then after I've, you know,
with Look Back in Anger breaking through the drinks trolley and introducing the kitchen sink, you get plays about certainties, about very clear political things. And what has happened in politics is that things have got fractured. So you now do get a lot of political theatre, but it doesn't look like old-fashioned political theatre. You get feminist theatre, you get lesbian and gay theatre, you get identity politics, and an issue like trafficking is absolutely ripe for examination in a show like this, because you can do something very, very intimate. People argue that political theatre is naive and that you can't change people's opinions. I would argue that you absolutely can, and that the experience of watching a solo performer like Genevieve being expressive and making you understand something in a very direct way is very, very powerful, and much more powerful than looking at a page of news on the internet and then clicking on something else.
It's another way of keeping issues in the public domain once they slip off the news agenda. But Isha, do you think that there is enough sort of onus on the theatre and what it can do to
done that 50 minutes on stage, I'm then left with a very sobering thought that there are hundreds of girls, you know, thousands, millions, whatever the number is, who are literally reliving that scenario over and over again, hour after hour after hour, without break. So, you know, to know that people who come and see the play are so affected by it, which they are, but as I said, we can all walk away from it. I can walk away from the stage. People go back and they're left with the memories. But the fact of the matter is that those girls are just living it.
What do you think then, David, the role that the arts have in issues like modern day slavery and trafficking, in particular, you know, presenting these issues on the stage?
I think political theatre is generally believed to be a minority interest. It's believed to be terribly unfashionable, but actually it's there in one form or another in all sorts of places. And political theatre used to be about certainty. There were plays about socialism from the 1950s onwards.